YouTubian buddies, this is Ultimate 23 Dragon, and welcome to episode 7 of Dragonite's Mailbag. We got a good boatload of questions, so let's get right into the action. How did I become interested in Tony Schumacher? Tony Schumacher is one of my signature drivers, in fact, probably the signature driver, a part of my top fuel squad in the NHRA. Mainly because he's the only one left. But anyway, well, there's actually two possible reasons. I don't remember the exact reason, but I know it's one of these two. It's either because of his sponsorship with the Army, and because of my age, he's the first driver I remember to be sponsored by the military. But the more probable reason is his comeback after his Memphis crash in 2000. And when the Memphis crash happened in 2000, if my date remembrance of this is right, it was sometime in August or September. So that means I was 9 when this happened, and it was a freaky deal. And keep in mind, 2000 was the year where basically everything could go wrong in auto racing. And considering that Top Fuel Dragsters is the fastest land speed thing in terms of auto racing, that can be a huge deal. And for anyone who has seen the crash, it was very vicious. It was crazy. That entire weekend is crazy if you've seen anything associated with that. And the way he's managed to come back and win all these championships the way he has after all this time, I think him just coming back after that is what got me into him. It was definitely one of those reasons, but I'm positive the Memphis thing is the main reason. Do I think the Xfinity and Truck Series should return to Memphis Motorsports Park as they just reopened the track, and Pikes Peak? That track opened a few years back. And what about the Nashville Fairgrounds track or Hickory? Should the Trucks or the Xfinity Series return there? Very interesting multitude of questions in terms of tracks making a comeback. Memphis, to me, I think they would have to improve the area a bit in order to have the Xfinity or Truck Series return. Xfinity Series here and there because they're trying to be just like the Cup Series. Truck Series most definitely. That was a pretty interesting racetrack for the Truck Series back in the day. Pikes Peak, that could work out. It's been years. I don't even remember what Pikes Peak looks like. I just know it looks like a... I know it's way high in the mountains, so the horsepower isn't what it's supposed to be. Like a lot of the mountain area racetracks. But Pikes Peak, that would be interesting to see how that could work with today's vehicles, especially for the Xfinity and Truck Series. Do I think it could happen? Unfortunately, I think the only way that could happen is if a few racetracks would have to be knocked off the schedule, and at this point I don't see that happening. Now, as for the Nashville Fairgrounds or Hickory, unfortunately, I think both racetracks would be too big for the current style for the Xfinity Series, but the Truck Series in their current format definitely could work. But unfortunately, I think the Truck Series is the only series that could return to the Nashville Fairgrounds or Hickory if that's a major need in terms of the people's desires. What started my dislike of Kyle Busch? Well, originally there was a trust rule, and back in the day, and this actually happened with me and a couple of my buddies, we used to have the assumption that if we were not big with one driver, we pretty much weren't going to trust his relatives as well. Because back when Kyle Busch was having his uprising in NASCAR, his brother Kurt Busch was actually the most evil driver in NASCAR up to that point. Obviously, things are way different now, which proves how much better Kurt has become, but how much more douchey Kyle has become. A lot of the negative-ish racing terms that relate to Busch actually apply to him. The only one that doesn't is Busch, and that's because of a Bristol commercial that Kurt did back in the day when he got Jimmy Spencer illegitimately suspended, and NASCAR decided we were going to favor Kurt, and there was a Bristol commercial where the crowd was booing Kurt to death, and Kurt says, "They're going Busch, Busch, they're just pronouncing it wrong." As for Kyle, though, I had a sneaky suspicion that he had the potential to be even more douchey than his brother. And through the years, he has continually proven time and again that that would be the case. Another thing that I think really does it is something my dad did years ago. Because my dad is actually into the Busch brothers, especially Kyle, and he told me this years ago, and still reminds me, like I care, that if you want to root for a driver who's going to win the lot, you better root for Kurt's brother Kyle. That would be great, except I don't root for whiners. And time and again, Kyle has proven multitudes of times that I'm more right about him than my dad is about him. Because when you win as much as Kyle has, but you're more known for whining than winning, what does that tell you? So basically, what started the dislike was the assumption he was going to be a baddie, and I didn't really rage out against him being a baddie until I started showing his baddie side. And most people figured that out along the lines of 2008. Because if his incident with Johnny Benson at Martinsville didn't make you hate Kyle Busch, then his rage out against Dale Jr. did. And I say the same thing about Danny Hamlin. If he taking out Truex didn't make you hate Hamlin, then him taking out Chase Elliott did. So essentially, it got that far. The distrust of Busch was building and building and building and building, and then when the Benson and Jr. incidents in 2008 happened, that's what started the Busch dislike marathon. And it's continued for over a decade. Which tracks do you think NASCAR should go to and which they should take away? It actually goes back to a question I had on a previous Dragonite's mailbag where they talked about how I would form the NASCAR schedule. And I came up with a multitude of different styles that could work, but mainly you have to get rid of a lot of the tracks that are exactly the same. And I made a mini list of tracks that I would associate the schedules with and all that stuff. It goes back to the second question, talking about Memphis and Pikes Peak, Nashville and Hickory. I really wish that Nashville Superspeedway was still a thing because that was a great track to race on. I know that I didn't mention it in the other question because that was Nashville Fairgrounds. That's a little smaller track. But I really like Nashville Superspeedway. I wish they would return to that. Another racetrack I would wish they would go back to was Rockingham, but I'm not sure about if management would be able to do anything like that. For the Cup Series, a lot of people say that they should go to Iowa, which basically is... It's bigger than Richmond, but smaller than Phoenix. It's a 7/8 track, I believe. So, that could definitely work. Another track that, this is kind of a funny one. If they wanted more road courses, I got a couple of different ones in mind. Virginia Motorsports Park would be an interesting road course that we could try. It'd be hilarious, because I've only seen a couple races at this particular track, but what about Circuit of the Americas? That could work out. And the interesting thing is that I think any Canadian racetrack, if you want to expand the brand even more, like you do with the Truck Series and did with the Xfinity Series, why doesn't the Cup Series do anything outside of that area? Because I have seen the NASCAR Pinty Series in a few of their races, and they have a lot of interesting racetracks. I think the main series of NASCAR, all three National Touring Series, could do good at, with the exception of the track they currently go to and the track they used to go to. Canadian Tire Motorsports Park is especially with that last turn. There's too many ridiculous controversies. No, Ty Dillon came up. No, Chase Elliott took him out. And no one knows what a loose truck can do whenever two trucks collide, apparently. And Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, the track is good, but unfortunately, they have found way too many ways to try and ruin that event, especially starting with their inaugural race, also known as Harvick Gate, which later became Ambrose Gate. And also, no offense to any of you guys in this area, but please, for the love of God, get rid of Talladega. I get it with Daytona. It's the France family's baby in terms of racetracks. You got the 500. Okay, I get it. Talladega has nothing super major about it. Woohoo! It's the biggest oval-ish track you have. And what? That's why I said this in one of the earlier things as well. I don't remember which video I said this in. It was probably one of my rant videos when Harvick decided to ruin Talladega a couple of years ago. I think it was that video I said this. But the Daytona 500, okay. But get rid of the rest of the restrictor plate races. We don't need Talladega, and you can move the Pepsi 400 elsewhere. Heck, do the Pepsi 400. It's the Coke Zero 400, I think, now. But anyway, it's been the Pepsi 400 for years. That's what I call it. Sonoma, Infineon, Sears Point. I still say Sears Point, but still. And also, you got to limit the amount of the 1.5-mile D-shaped oval tracks. We did not need the clones like Kansas and Chicagoland. And Charlotte, I get with 2 events, 3 if you want to count the All-Star race. But all these tracks that are 1.5 D-shaped oval racetracks, they do not need more than 1 event. With the possible exception of Charlotte, which is now transferring to the Roval for its chase race, which is not a good idea. And if I saw this right, I think we're going to get to that a bit later. But so far, that's the lineup I would have in terms of swapping out the racetracks. Get rid of Talladega, put in Rockingham, give Iowa a cup date. Oh yeah, I didn't mention this either, but why is the Xfinity Series going to Road America? That track is way too long and way too narrow. Like, literally any other racetrack could have worked. But anyway, yes to Rockingham, yes to Iowa for the Cup Series, a possible yes to Circuit of the Americas, Virginia Motorsports Park, that could work. Any Canadian track that's not the 2 that's been known in the last decade. But no to Talladega, no to the D-Sheep over 1.5-mile tracks. I think I said no to Talladega already, and definitely no to Road America. You guys have to do better. I spent 6 minutes on this question. Next. In what order did I go in when I started watching auto racing, specifically NASCAR, IndyCar, and the NHRA? Well, I know I started watching all 3 in the 90s. I think NASCAR was first, and then the NHRA, and then IndyCar and/or Champ Car. Because back then I didn't know the difference. I saw that style of car, I thought it was the same series. I didn't know about the split until the early 2000s, around that time. But I think NASCAR and then the NHRA, and then the open wheel racing series was the order that we went in. Because I got into auto racing because of my dad, and he was constantly watching it all the time. And for the first few years of my life, I mainly watched for the McDonald's car, regardless of who it was. And the first driver I remember having that car was actually Bill Elliott, and that's how he became my top guy for the longest time. As for IndyCar, it's kind of funny. I think Champ Car was actually the first form of open wheel racing that I was in. Oh, this is cute. I got Match Game on in the background. They got the Super Match on, and we were just talking about it. Anyway, the Super Match is on right now, and literally their Super Match thing is Hickory Blank. We were just talking about Hickory in the previous questions. But anyway, off that distraction, back to the question. The NHRA, the McDonald's were Corey McClenathan and Jim Yates and Cruz Pendragon. NASCAR, there was Bill Elliott. And IndyCar / Champ Car, the first McDonald's, and a lot of people may not remember this, was actually Tony Kanaan. He was in the McDonald's car in the late 90s. And I remember that interesting race in Michigan, where Kanaan won based on fuel mileage, barely holding off Montoya. I remember that race, and I found it recently comparing the ESPN call to the international call, and the international guys went crazy when Pappas ran out of fuel. I invite you to watch that, in case you're not sure what I'm talking about. But anyway, the order was NASCAR, the NHRA, and IndyCar. Now, what was the top thing according to them? Hickory what? You had Hickory Stick, Hickory Smoked, and what else? Hickory Dickory Dock? Wow, that's an insult. I'll be honest, I don't know what she answered, but it wasn't any of those, so it was probably Hickory, North Carolina. But come on, man. But NASCAR NHRA open wheel, that's the question's answer. As someone who's one of the top 3 all-time is Andy Houston, that's kind of much of an insult. But still, it was the 1970s, so... No, I still don't accept that. With the exception of Charlotte and Vegas for obvious reasons, what oval track should IndyCar return to? Besides Richmond. It's kind of funny, with Richmond getting rid of all their grandstands, they can technically have a sold-out crowd now. Because back in the day, when Richmond had it, they closed off all of the I don't know why they did this, because they definitely have more people there with IndyCar than you could with NASCAR nowadays. What happened was when the IndyCar went to Richmond in the mid-2000s, all they would do is have the fans sit on the front stretch. That's it. They would block off turn 1 and their grandstand all the way around to turn 4. With Richmond getting rid of all their grandstands, they could technically have sold-out shows for IndyCar now. Because I guarantee you we haven't forgot. But anyway, in the question, the obvious choices were, according to the YouTuber in question, Michigan and Chicagoland. That would seem obvious, but my main problem there would be the potential for big wrecks and all that stuff. Because if you could have all those disasters at Charlotte and Vegas, who knows what could happen at Michigan? I still remember that incident where Dario Franchitti went ape garbage all over Weldon, when technically the crash was both their faults, but Dario thought, I'm perfect, I'm going to blame everyone else for it, including one of my closest friends. And then the next week he flipped himself at Kentucky. But still, and Chicagoland, they've had great finishes over the years, and I only remember one crazy crash that Chicago had years ago. I don't remember what the driver was. I think it was Ryan Briscoe, but I'm not sure. I can't say for sure. For some reason, that's the car that comes into mind. I'm not even sure if that's the right car. But anyway, Chicagoland, to the best of my knowledge, has only had one crazy crash that I can recall, and they constantly had great finishes all the time. I am not watching Catch 21. Forget it. But anyway, other possible tracks that they could go to, New Hampshire, that would be great, except the last New Hampshire memory was a disaster in 2011. Milwaukee, definitely agree with, but they have to get some sort of management thing for that to work out. Milwaukee's a very underrated track, not just because my guys have won there a lot, and when I say my guys, I mean more than just Johnny Benson back in the day. I remember a race Sebastian Bourdais won, and Meredith was ticked at me, because he's not supposed to win in an oval. Anyway. Okay. One of my folks telling me something. Anyway. Homestead, Miami. They've had some classic finishes over the years, and I think that could work out. Let's see. Pikes Peak. That would be a good idea. New Hampshire. That could definitely work out. Milwaukee, definitely. We're basically to the point that any non-humongo banked ovals would be a great welcome return. Because unfortunately, it looks like that minus Indy and a couple other areas, IndyCar is trying to transform into Formula One, and you don't need that. Bring back the ovals. Good ovals, not any bad ones. Okay? Have I ever heard of a YouTuber named Black Flags Matter? I actually have. Now, in the question for this one, he is compared as being, quote, he's NASCAR's Corzemba. I don't know who that is, so I wouldn't be able to know. But I have heard of him. And basically what his channel deals with, based on what I've seen, is either bad career reviews or good or bad season reviews of particular drivers, mainly in the Cup Series. With one exception, and that's actually the main video I've watched of his, and it was his Blaze Alexander tribute. Because Blaze is a driver I was actually intrigued by back in the day, shortly before his death. I remember watching the ARCA race at Michigan that he won in 2001, and I was intrigued by him, by his racing style, and also his name, because I didn't realize his first name was not spelled B-L-A-Z-E. Of course, I was 10 when this stuff went on, but still. Well, anyway, and the other reason I actually know him is because he's commented on a few of my videos in the past, and one was very intriguing to me. Recently, he commented on one of my videos. It was my Mayfield Massacre Series video, why I explained why I was worried about the scenario going on with Jeremy Mayfield. And for those who don't know, the reason I was worried about what's going on with Jeremy is because I was seeing a pattern between that and what happened with the second suspension of Kevin Grubb. And if you know how the Kevin Grubb story ends, you would know why I was worried about Mayfield. I'm not sure if the Black Flags Matter person didn't understand. I'm not sure if he didn't understand what the video was about and what I was trying to accomplish in the video, because he called my video disgusting. And I later found out that he also chastised the video on Twitter. Woohoo! So, like a couple others in the past, I think it was a simple misunderstanding about what he thought he saw and what my video was about. But other than that, that's the only interaction with this particular person that I've basically been involved with. I watched his Blaze video, He's watched a few of my videos, and I actually also watched a Scott Riggs video recently, because I found that one interesting, for obvious reasons, if you know about Scott Riggs. I had to turn the fan on, it's getting stuffy, so if you hear the fan in the background, don't mind that. Anyway, the next question is, if you had to replace members of your NASCAR Dozen with current generation drivers, who would you include? That's a very interesting question. I had never really considered that. So, the NASCAR Dozen, among the current drivers, only 4 of them are still left in NASCAR. And that would be Johnny Sauter, Brad Keselowski, Casey Kane, and Joe Nemechek. Now, Nemechek, I don't know if you want to consider or not, because all he's doing is starting parking to earn money. And you see where that went. But anyway, so essentially I would have to replace 8 drivers, but my thing would be a legacy thing, because there's 3 of them I would absolutely not replace. I would not replace Johnny Benson, I would not replace Bill Elliott, and I would not replace Andy Houston. All of them have some sort of major impact that the other 9 members, no matter what they do in their career, can't match. Because they've molded how I feel about NASCAR today. And I'm sure a lot of people have that kind of similar way with their drivers, especially if you're Dale Earnhardt Sr. fans of the past. One of my friends that we know as Greenlight is an Earnhardt Sr. fan of the past. And, okay, it's probably for different reasons than most people, but essentially I'm asked to replace 5 of the drivers if I included the current drivers and the 3 legacy members, the 3 big dogs of the NASCAR Dozen. The only problem is when I think about it, I can only come up with 4. Because you have Bill's son, Chase, Dave Blaney's son, Ryan, and Joe Nemechek's son, John Hunter Nemechek. Those would be the obvious givens. The only other driver among today's generation I could think of summoning to the NASCAR Dozen, if I ever did anything like that, would be Martin Truex Jr. And the reason is that I basically became a Truex defender when Truexgate happened back in, I want to say it was 2013. Wow, time flew. Yeah, it was 2013. Because I was discussing it with my boyfriend, and we were just talking for a little under a year at that time. And I also remember doing a reaction video where me and Greenlight were arguing to death about it. Because it was the one where Boyer spun on purpose, and Greenlight insists that his drivers don't do that, and he was pissed off at NASCAR, and I was pissed off at NASCAR, and Meredith was caught in the middle of it. But basically, he's the only new member that's not a relative that I would think of putting into the NASCAR Dozen at this point. So basically, if I have the 3 and all of the other current drivers, I would only have 11, because I couldn't think of another driver that I would like to have in the NASCAR Dozen among the current drivers other than Truex. I really can't. Maybe after this video I'll think of someone, but we'll just go from there. You know, it's kind of funny. I know for a fact that Andy Houston's son, Clark Houston, is into racing. Maybe if he gets in the Truck Series, maybe he'll be the 12th new member? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? That's kind of funny, because I also have Chase, Ryan, and John Hunter in their own little mini-group that I like to call the NASCAR Dozen Next Generation, which essentially is just the children of the NASCAR Dozen. And if I could add Clark Houston to that, I know he races, but he's not into NASCAR yet. I don't know if he ever would be. I guess that would depend on career direction. Because I know for a fact that the Houstons like doing things old school, which explains a lot, but I guess if a 12th member would come in and Clark gets into NASCAR, I think he'd be the one. So it will be interesting to see where that could go from here. is The Undertaker my favorite wrestler? That's also an interesting question. Because back in the day, I was here and there with the Attitude Era, because back then, when you're little kids and you have to go to bed earlier and all that stuff, I never was able to watch Raw back in the day, and SmackDown I could only watch for an hour, because my bedtime was always 9 o'clock. Yeah. So I was here and there with the wrestling scene, and I guess I saw The Undertaker before his American Badass gimmick, here and there a few times. And I guess when the American Badass gimmick came on, and I was able to watch a little more of wrestling back in those times, it was a very intriguing gimmick to me. And then I was really into the theme song when he had Rollin' by Limp Bizkit, and I actually have that CD and a few other songs by Limp Bizkit as well. I know, surprising. But they're not really rap either. They're more like rockin' rap, which is a better version of it, because you can understand the lyrics. Like, who can't say rollin', 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 rollin'? Who can't say that? Anyway. Me just rambling along again. I think what really sealed the deal is when he went back to, well, first it was known as the Dead Man Hybrid form, is when he looked like he was part American Badass, but was converting back to his Dead Man form from back in the 90s, for the most part, when WrestleMania 20 came around in 2004, in what WWE wants to call the main event of the event. If you know wrestling, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, basically, when that happened, and he returned to that form, and I don't know why I was mega hyped, because if you remember the storyline leading up to that, he was facing Kane, who had buried American Badass form Undertaker in a casket match at Survivor Series, and then started all the hype and stuff. And I remember one specific episode of Raw, I think it was an episode of Raw, where Kane was doing a eulogy and all that stuff, and there was a casket behind him. He opens the casket, and there is an urn. And I don't know why I remember this, but I said the instant that happened that Paul Bearer may be making a return. And I don't know why I was attached to that character, which would explain what happened in the Johnny Benson birthday bash of 2004, aka the worst pay-per-view of all time, the 2004 Great American Bash. Don't ask. So, essentially, that confirmed to me that it was a return to Dead Man form, and when WrestleMania 20 happened and that match went on, yeah, it was a 6-minute match, but I felt hugely connected for that, and he's been my top guy ever since. Now, honestly, I wasn't really attached to any other wrestler because of how my bedtimes worked back in the day, when you're a kid going through school and all that stuff, but I was really attached to The Undertaker, and I think the only wrestler that came close was probably Eddie Guerrero, but even then, he did not have that connectivity with me like The Undertaker has. And interestingly enough, I think Eddie became one of my favorites after that BS event of the 2004 Great American Bash. But essentially, feeling that connection, I'm not sure what it is. It reminds me of that Johnny Benson card story, where there's a Benson card. It was 5 days after Talladega 2001 in the fall. I see a Benson item, I stare at his eyes, and I just feel something. To this day, I still don't know what it is. And I guess my connection with The Undertaker would be the same way. It was something like that. It wasn't a card, but it was just him. Maybe it was the majesticness of it all. Whether it be American Badass form, or Dead Man form, or even Dead Man Hybrid. But something like that is probably the reason The Undertaker will always be my top favorite in the wrestling world. Who should be the play-by-play guy for NBC? Well, I know a lot of people are iffy about Rick Allen, and I'm not sure as to why. Probably just a bunch of, oh, you're not Mike Joy people. That's what it feels like. Because Rick Allen's been around since 2003, back when Speed Channel came over and he was hired to do the truck stuff, and he's pretty good. Now, he doesn't have the experience level of Mike Joy, but that shouldn't deduce to anything. I think Rick Allen's fine in the booth. Now, that being said, I know a lot of people want Alan Bestwick, but I'm not sure that he'd want to return, which also puts the focus on the two main open-wheel guys that they have, which would be Lee Diffie or Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee, I could only see doing, like, the Indy Light Series races. Lee Diffie, I could only see Lee Diffie doing Cup whenever Rick Allen is away on assignment, like a couple of years ago. Or maybe it was last year, something along that line, where they had Lee Diffie fill in for Rick Allen because NBC wanted Rick Allen to do track and field stuff because of his track and field background. And yes, that's a thing. I watched the infamous Usain Bolt third place race, and Rick Allen was the one that called it. That's literally the only reason why I watched it. Well, that and it was Usain Bolt's retirement race, so it would be interesting to see how that could work. And the question also asked who would be the color analyst and be the hit reporters. Now, the Dale Jr. and the four-man booth thing, I like Dale Jr. so far. So it will be interesting to see how he can do over the elements of the season. But so far, it's been pretty positive, and I don't think it's because of his name. Because does anyone know any race that Dale Earnhardt Sr. did commentary? I don't. And I've been watching this for a long time. Anyway, the pit reporter should pretty much stay where it is. And well, Marty Snyder or would he just focus on NASCAR? I think Snyder can go wherever he wants, because I saw in one video he was actually doing rugby, which I didn't even know about until I saw a video recently, but it would be interesting to see how this could go. But basically, I think it goes back to the IndyCar story, where does Alan Bestwick go? I think it eventually would fall on that. And then, if you saw that video, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But it will be interesting to see where that could go from there. I think he would be the main factor to see who gets shuffled to what in terms of the future, depending on what Bestwick wants to do. But I think everything so far is fine as is. Minus special reports and stuff like track and field stuff. That could be a little more interesting of a story. But I think that's the only issue that NBC could have, would be those special report things. But anyway. Why have I had trouble getting interested in baseball and basketball? That's a very interesting question. Here is the main thing, though. Both sports, to me, are very, very boring. And one thing I've also noticed is that fans of those sports especially like chastising auto racing and stuff. You know the assumption that people around your age would always go, "Who watches auto racing? All they do is go in circles." It's mainly people associated with other sports that say that. A lot of times it's football, but in my school it's mainly basketball people. And between that and ESPN becoming the LeBron James channel, just forget it. And I can make an easy argument. Well, my sport may go around in circles, but all you do is go back and forth and throw a ball. Woohoo! Dribble, dribble, dribble. Yep, go the other way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dribble, dribble, dribble. What's so fun about that? In baseball, I actually went to one baseball game years ago. It was July 4th when this happened. I was invited to go by some neighbors, and I went. It was a minor league game. It was hot as freakazoid. And it was a minor league game back in my area. I went to a game when we used to have the Richmond Braves. Now we have the Richmond Flying Squirrels. No joke. The Braves won the game. I don't remember who they were against. It was so freaking long ago. At least over a decade ago. Maybe a decade and a half. I don't remember what year it was. But baseball is just, yeah. It's a good game to play. It's a bad game to watch. It's just Dullsville. And basketball is no better. Especially when you have to have 2 minutes of action spread out over 30 minutes. And I know this because there was a college basketball game that essentially took out the first 20 laps of a truck race at Phoenix because it took them 30 minutes to finish a 2-minute game. I am glad to the point where auto racing could actually interfere with other sports. Unfortunately, it's mainly the UFC and not basketball, but still, it does help whenever we can get the upper hand on them every once in a while. But between the games being too long, or too boring, or it's Dullsville to watch, and ESPN becoming the LeBron James channel, that's why you can't get into sports like that. You know, funny enough, I could see people saying the same thing about auto racing with Fox becoming the Kyle Busch network now that Dale Jr. is retired. But still, LeBron James is more of an issue at this point. Because he's infected an entire network. At least you don't see Fox programming, as in the actual Fox station, having Kyle Busch on all their shows. You don't have that with ESPN anymore. What are my thoughts on Monster Truck Racing Circus, preferably Monster Jam in the early 2000s and the Penta-Point series in the 1990s? I'll be honest, I've never heard of the Penta-Point series. I'm not even sure what that is. Now, Monster Jam I know very much and well. I think I got into Monster Jam probably around the same time I did to open wheel racing, back in the late 90s. Because I remember the Goldberg truck and the NWO truck, and Gravedigger's been around forever and a half. And basically, this is when auto racing and wrestling started to try to fuse with each other, because back in those days, we had WCW trying to get into NASCAR, we got WWE trying to get into the NHRA, and WCW also got in a little bit into Monster Jam, most specifically Tom Mentz's Goldberg truck, which is now known as Maximum Destruction, which shortened its name to Max D. But I've always enjoyed Monster Truck Racing, and I like what they're trying to do and evolve it, and now they're evolving it even further by having their finale at different events. Which, I get the tradition element of Vegas, but anytime your signature event is Vegas, bad things always tend to happen. Believe me, we know. I'm not just referring to IndyCar, it's other racing series too. But anyway, I've always enjoyed Monster Truck Racing. And I think Monster Truck Racing, for the most part, has gotten better and better. I'm just concerned about them trying to implement a point series that they've done the past few years. That's my only concern at this point. Don't try and be like other motorsports. That's something the NHRA refuses to learn. I don't know why I just did that. But anyway, just assure me that there's no ridiculousness with these point systems and these different types of thingies going on in all these different areas, and then you all converge on one circuit and then it becomes a disaster. Just don't do that. Just make sure you don't do that, and then we'll be okay. But I think Monster Jam in the 2000s was probably their best period up to this point. I really liked watching Bobby Z and Monster Mutt. Monster Mutt, the original variation Monster Mutt, is probably my favorite monster truck of all time. I'm a dog person, what can you say? Why do you think every so often you get the Old English Sheepdog win Best in Show video on my channel? That's why. I like dogs. Oh, this is gonna be good. What's with my obsession over drivers who are sponsored by McDonald's and Valvoline? I know what this goes back to. I was talking about my favorites in all of auto racing, and if you know the pattern of the drivers I like, you will notice that a lot of them were sponsored either now or in the past by either McDonald's or Valvoline. But I assure you, not all of them apply. Jamie McMurray's been sponsored by McDonald's for a lot of races, but he's not one of my guys. Carl Edwards has been sponsored by Valvoline for a lot of races, but he's the top mega baddie. Okay. And there's been 4 Cup Series full-time McDonald's drivers. I'm only into 2 of them. And one of those McDonald's drivers now is a bad guy, even though he hasn't raced in the longest while, but that's because he's a Yahoo mouth. By the way, I'm referring to Jimmy Spencer, by the way. Anyway, mainly the reason that there is this type of thing usually goes back to one of 2 things. Either a driver, how they race, their personality, or any of that stuff, or their connections with a sponsorship. And this goes back to... this goes back to my buds over the years, because back years ago, there were 4 sponsor groups that we always seemed to connect with some sort of rivalry against each other. The much obscure, but is more true than you could imagine, especially in the Cup Series rivalry of Valvoline versus Tide. Because how many years have we had Mark Martin and Ricky Rudd in the Valvoline and Tide rides? And then sure enough, they lose their sponsorships and goes to 2 completely different drivers. Valvoline went to Johnny Benson, and Tide went to Ricky Craven, which then sets off a story between me and my buddy Meredith. She, the Craven fan, me, the Benson fan. But it didn't start that way. And then we had the more popular McDonald's versus GM Goodwrench rivalry, which was mainly started by Bill Elliott and Dale Earnhardt Sr. even before they had the sponsorship. But keep in mind, all of us are 90 babies, so that explains a lot there. And I guess the connection really rubbed off in terms of other things. With Bill Elliott having the McDonald's sponsorship, and then I started watching other forms of racing. I got into the McDonald's drivers there. In drag racing, Top Fuel, you had Corey McLenithan, who I thought I was actually connected by it because of the name. Once again, I was like a toddler-ish like area. How old was I when I started watching the NHRA? I want to say it was between 5 and 8. Something along that line. Maybe 5 to 7. I don't remember the exact age. At the same time, we had Cruz Pendragon in the McDonald's car for Funny Car, and then we had Jim Yates in the Pro Stock car. And he actually had a GM Goodwrench rival with Warren Johnson. He was the only non-NASCAR guy to have a GM Goodwrench rivalry in that aspect. And between the Elliott-Earnhardt rivalry and the Yates-Johnson rivalry, that started the McDonald's versus GM Goodwrench connection. Which didn't work out in the next generation, because that was Andy Houston versus Kevin Harvick. And both of them had difficult circumstances. Andy had a team that didn't care, and Kevin had to fill in for Dale Earnhardt. And ironically enough, they never really had the big oomph rivalry like others had, but it's because Andy didn't really have a shot because PPI Motorsports didn't care about him. As for Valvoline, the first Valvoline driver I actually got into actually wasn't Johnny Benson. It was Joe Amato of the NHRA. But that's because he also had Snoopy on his car for a lot of times. He was the first non-McDonald's driver I actually ever got into. And the Valvoline sponsorship just came along with the territory. I was into his car because of Snoopy. And interestingly enough, Joe Amato is the reason that Darrell Russell became one of my NHRA favorites on top of that. Because when Joe retired, another driver that I liked, Gary Scelzi, is the one who got Darrell to drive for Joe. And that happened until one of the worst days of my life. Go back to the day of the 2004 Great American Bash. Yeah, that day was a nightmare. But as for Valvoline, the only other drivers I've really gotten into in terms of Valvoline was actually drag racers. There's no other Valvoline driver in NASCAR I've ever gotten into. I wasn't into Scott Riggs, I wasn't into Patrick Carpentier, I'm definitely not into Carl Edwards, so forget that. But I am into the Valvoline drag racers like Joe Amato and Darrell Russell, Dale Worsham for a time, Jack Beckman, Ron Krischer. I'm not sure why I got into the McDonald's drivers as a whole for the most part. Because back in that day, I was also into a couple other drivers that McDonald's sponsored in, back then, the Busch/Nationwide series. I was into Jason Keller, and he's also a driver I met in the past. And there's also Bobby Hamilton Jr., but I rooted for him more because I was sympathetic towards him because that was the year he lost his dad. And it was more the sympathy thing than the McDonald's thing. But the McDonald's and Valvoline thing is more associated with either coincidences or rivalries with my friends. But more or less coinky-dinks. Because the McDonald's drivers, between the time where Bill Elliott had it until the time Bobby Hamilton Jr. had it, those guys in NASCAR, yes. Bill Elliott, Andy Houston, Jason Keller, Bobby Hamilton Jr. Valvoline, it's just Johnny Benson and all the drag racers. That's about it. It's mainly more of a coincidence deal on that aspect. But that's about it. But there was a rivalry thing at the time. Not so much anymore. I see a pattern because at least once per episode, maybe once per every other episode, I always get this kind of question. Who do I think is going to win the Indy 500? Now, as you know, the Indy 500 already came and gone, and Will Power's the one who won it, and believe me, only one person I know of didn't want to see it, although there was the near miracle ending for 3 different major underdogs. But this is what the question says. Who do you think will win the Indy 500? Will Kanaan win his second? Will Dixon win his second? Will Graham Rahal pull off an upset? Could Sato pull off an upset? Same with Rossi. Will another Andretti driver like Marco or Ryan Hunter-Wright win? Or will Elio go for 4? And do you think Pagenaud, Newgarden, or Will Power could be a factor? Pagenaud and Newgarden, definitely. I would not have considered Will Power because of his luck and his past. Kanaan, I would have, and he did pretty good for a while in the race. And then everything fell apart, as always. Dixon, I thought could have won it. Graham Rahal, no. Sato. Rossi, it wouldn't have surprised me, but it would have taken a lot for that to happen. Marco, no. Hunter-Ray, maybe. And Elio going for 4, it wouldn't have surprised me. I'm surprised how crazy that event was. Because minus 1 collision between Sato and somebody else, I don't remember who it was, there were like 5 or 6 different crashes, and every single one of them were the same, and 3 of them were the drivers that me and my crew likes. The one driver that Meredith had in the race, which was Elio, and then you had my 2 guys, both Bourdais and Kanaan, have a similar issue. And it was Kanaan's incident that nearly set up that miracle ending. I'm going to be honest with you on this one. I watched this at my job, right? And when the Kanaan caution came out, there was a fuel mileage deal going on where 3 different massive underdogs could have won it. It was Oriol Servia, Stefan Wilson, and Jack Harvey. And when that happened, and they were saving fuel, and it was in single digits amount of laps left, everyone was wondering if there was a possibility one of those three could have won it. And I would have laughed, and I'm sure no one would have disliked the Indy 500 had any of those three won. Because Oriol Servia has been around for a long time. Him winning would have been a great story. Stefan Wilson would have been my pick among the three to win. Kia 3 theory is the main reason, and what his car means. And Jack Harvey, I think, would have been the biggest upset among the entire field, let alone those three, if he had won the Indy 500. But sure enough, all of them had to pit. But when they had that little battle going on when the restart happened with, what was it, 8 to go? Something along that line? And Stefan Wilson took the lead. I was excited because among those three, I knew it wasn't going to happen, but I was hoping against reality that somehow he would win the race. But he didn't. Willpower won. Actually, hang on. Because I know I was texting these updates to my boyfriend when this happened. Let me go all the way back to June. Good luck to me finding this. The end of June. Oh, already on June 9th. That's cool. Okay, let's see. Let me see if I can go back to... What day am I on? On June the 5th. Still not there yet. Okay, let's see. Now what day am I on? No, that was the party I went to. That was before that. Where am I at? May 25th. I passed it. Well, that means I'm close, so that's good. I'm getting to it. Okay, I messed them up. Now I'm on the 30th. I passed it again. Let me go the other way. Let's see. Okay, I'm definitely on the right track. Alright, there we go. Sunday, May 27th. Let's see what I said here. How did they miss all that? That was... What was this talking about? Is that even the right race? That has to be the right one. Alright, hang on a second. My mind now, because I know I texted about it. Did everything disappear afterward or something? Anyway. But anyway. Great, I got random things disappearing. That's great. Yep, I got random things disappearing in my phone again. It's just going to be like my other phone. But anyway, this is what I said. What ends up happening, because I don't know why this happened, because I'm looking through my phone and all of a sudden the first non-pick text message I'm talking about was talking about how I think William Byron is the next Casey Atwood. That was during the Cup race, which happened after Indy. So somehow my texts are disappearing. That's great. Stupid phone. But anyway, this is what I said. I essentially said, when the caution came out and they were talking about the fuel mileage thing, I was telling my boyfriend, this is Will Power's race to win. Because the other three are massive underdogs, and it's a fuel mileage game at this point. He was not happy. I don't remember why, but he's not a Will Power person. But anyway, what ends up happening because of this is that when the restart happened, like I was saying, I was hoping against hope that at least one of them could have made it. It would not have worked out with Servia because Power had passed him as well. And then when both Wilson and Harvey pitted, and it looked like Harvey could have gone a bit longer, but maybe he would have ran out of the backstretch, I don't know. When that happened and Power won, it was earned for him, considering all he's been through, but you really wish that he wouldn't have won, because you want to see one of those three underdogs won. But then if he wouldn't have won and they won it anyway, Scott Dixon would have won it, and I would have been pissed off. But anyway, that's essentially how Indy went. Sorry for the phone thing, but stupid phone. Knew there was going to be a screw up. Anyway, yeah. That's how Indy went. It definitely had a dramatic finish. It definitely could be a finish of the year material because of the excitement and the hype and all that. It was just that crazy. And I also do wonder if any of those three would get a chance like that ever again at Indy. I'd like to see that. Just to see what would have happened in a real finale between the three. And no fuel mileage thing. I'm not a fan of fuel mileage races, and stuff like that is why. There you go. Can I do a video for top 10 greatest crew chiefs in NASCAR history? That's an interesting question that I'm not sure even I could tackle. Because crew chiefs isn't one of my best expertises. There's a few off the bat that I could name that have been around for a long time. I think it goes back to my best NASCAR drivers video. The main problem would be determining success level versus competition versus era. Like how I had a bunch of drivers from the older days on my best NASCAR drivers list. Now, granted, no one argued about Herb Thomas, but I'm positive there are some out there who are going, different era and all that stuff, and yeah. Like, crew chiefs, what crew chiefs from the older days and the new generation could I consider? Can I consider crew chiefs from other different series, mainly the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series? Are there any massive legends there? Because you know that if I try to construct this order, and then if the order ends up being raced out, I know I can't make everybody happy. And believe me, I've tried, and somehow I've massively failed. But if I try to do this kind of countdown, and I put in certain crew chiefs who've worked with my guys, or if they worked with other people but they're controversial, then you get people asking, why'd you put this person here? Why'd you get this person there? Crew chiefs is not my specialty. It's something I could try. I'm just not sure how it would work out, or even which ones to consider. Another thing is that since crew chiefs is not my expertise, I'm afraid of leaving somebody off who should have been obvious. Like, for example, if I put in a few different crew chiefs from the past, and somehow I forget Chad Knaus for saying, where's Chad Knaus? He's won 7 championships with Jimmy Johnson and all that stuff. And then you have the people arguing, well, he cheated a lot, so he doesn't care and all that stuff. And then too many arguments from there. I just want to be like any other happy go-loving NASCAR YouTuber, just trying to make people happy with entertainment and all that stuff. And I know the top 10 countdown is what my channel has become known for signature-wise, but trying to make people happy that way is very difficult to do, which is why I do it on a once-a-month basis with different videos and all that stuff. I try. And crew chiefs, I can try. It would just depend on how much research I could get done. And if I do the crew chiefs video, it would be at the very least come out next year. But if I get the inspiration and oomph to do a video like that, then I'll be able to do it. What did I think of NASCAR's coverage when it was on TNN? Ah, yes, the era where you had multiple networks and everybody loved every single one of them. Although ESPN was always tough because they had Bob Jenkins. TNN, the Nashville network back in the day. They had a lot of great entertainment back in the day. They had NASCAR, they had arena football, they had Roller Jam when it was good for the first season and maybe the second, I don't remember. They also had ECW, which no one really cared about back in the day unless you were from Philadelphia. No joke. But anyway, in terms of NASCAR, they actually had very good coverage and all that stuff. I would actually have them... I don't know where I'd have them. The problem with ranking TNN in terms of that kind of thing is that all the networks back in the day before the Fox NBC thing and Fox ruined everything, all the networks were just so awesome. It's hard to put one above another. Because ESPN undoubtedly would be number one, but then you get to CBS and NBC for their couple of races, and then you have TBS and TNN. You just don't know where to rank all of them and all that stuff. I know most people would have CBS as probably number 2, but that is a very tough one to rank. If I did a top 5 countdown of pre-Fox NBC era channels, as in these networks, I don't know which one would go where. I think NBC would only be last because they only did a couple races. They did Homestead and maybe something else. But among TBS, CBS, and TNN, to me they were right around the same. You really can't rank them. The question also asked specifically how good were Rick Benjamin, Eli Gold, and other booth announcers after Mike Joy went to CBS exclusively, and only TNN as a fill-in. Now, I was 10 the last time those guys covered it. Actually, I wasn't even 10. I was 9 when they last covered a race. Yeah, I was 9 when they last covered a race. I've always enjoyed those types of coverages. I always liked ESPN more. TNN, I think, would be along the same lines as CBS and TBS. Eli Gold, he's always been a good announcer. It's kind of a shame that he's associated more with Alabama football now, and that's it, because that's on the radio, and we don't get that here. Yeah, I think you do hear Eli Gold time for time in his coverage of how something happened in an Alabama game if CBS shows it, like they did that one time with the Auburn game, the Miracle Auburn finish at Auburn. But anyway... Rick Benjamin, very underrated announcer. I think Rick Benjamin is most known for his ARCA coverage and the coverage of Champ Car back when they was on the Speed Channel. And I think that's mainly what Rick Benjamin is best known for. In terms of NASCAR, he's probably best known for, and I don't know how many of you guys remember this show, Race Day. Oh, man, if RPM Tonight did not exist, I think I would use the Race Day theme song for my intro. Because I always enjoyed Race Day. And that's what I remember most when it comes to those particular commentators. But for me, TNN, CBS, and TBS were basically the same in terms of their coverage. And even though it wasn't ESPN back in the day, they was still pretty darn good. And they would put Fox to shame. They would. That's how good the Golden Age was. What is my favorite NHRA event of all time? That is a good dang question. It would be hard for me to calculate that kind of thing, because there's a lot of different events that I could consider as a top favorite. Let me see what NHRA events I have in this little folder here. Let's see, what was this one called? 2006 NHRA Automobile Club of Southern California NHRA Finals. The 2006 Finals, that is the one known for Tony Schumacher's 4.42 record that helped him earn a bonus 20 points to win the championship. That's one I'll always remember. Let's see. The NHRA Toyo Tires Nationals. That is the one that got rain delayed all the way back to Wednesday. And what happened in that event is that it got rain delayed back to Wednesday and all that stuff. I had a few different drivers in the finals. And it's most memorable for John Force in his 200th final red lighting and giving the win to one of my favorites, Tony Pendragon. And I also remember two of the... This goes back to the Valvoline Masters question. I totally forgot about Rod Fuller. How did I forget about that? Rod Fuller was against, I think, Doug Herbert, and I think Herbert won the event to seal Fuller out of the countdown, which is NHRA's answer to the chase. Yeah. But anyway, what other events do I have in here? What is this one? The Mopar Mile High NHRA National... Oh! the 2014 Mopar Mile High NHRA Nationals. I only got that for one reason, and it's a countdown I hope to do one day. It'd be 101 things you never thought you'd see a race car driver do. And in the 2014 Mopar Mile High NHRA Nationals, Steve Johnson won without moving. So, it was only the first round, so don't worry about that. What was that one? That's a qualifying event where Steve Johnson did something funny. Let's see. And the Walk Away series, some ARCA videos. Let's see. Funny ways of saying D and Q. Let's see. That's not it. Jeez, that video. Fox got Jim Ross to do commentary for a NASCAR driver fight. You don't want to know what that is. Let's see. IndyCar stuff. The Dana Vengeance Duel. That's an IndyCar thing. NHRA Memphis WTF. That's all one of... Actually, two of those were one event. Yeah, what... Memphis, that's the event I referenced earlier when it came to Tony Schumacher's incident. And then, the same weekend, Larry Dixon did the exact same thing. He's another driver I got into, but that's because I wasn't into the Bernsteins. But anyway, let's see what else I have here. Let's see. The Eric Medlin Ice Cream Theory. That's a Celsi Says thing. Let's see. Was there anything else drag racing I had in here other than the other one? I don't. So, if it's not the 2006 finals, I know the event because that's the first thing I saw. It's labeled as a personal favorite event, so I guess my answer to my favorite NHRA event of all time would be this one. The 2004 NHRA Pontiac Excitement Nationals. Now, for those who don't know, that would be the Ohio event, and I referenced this in the Destiny Race Countdown, because for those who don't know, the Pontiac Excitement Nationals was the last win for one of my drag racing crew, Darrell Russell, which I referenced earlier in the video. But the reason this is a favorite is not just because of that, but in said event... Why is this thing not... Okay, that's a weird thing that happened just now. But anyway, what ends up happening is that in said video... Is anything going to go right here? Yeah. So anyway, the Top Fuel final was Darrell Russell and Tony Schumacher. Arguably my two top favorites. But the IndyCar final also had two of my guys going against each other. It was Del Worsham and... Who was the other driver? Gary Scelzi. So, four of my drivers were in the Nitro final, so that was cool. Who was in the final for Pro Stock? I don't think any of my guys were. Let me take a quickie look. Well, Greg Anderson, he's not one of my guys. Dave Connolly, he is. So, Dave Connolly was in the final, but lost to Greg Anderson. And then we had Andrew Hines versus Steve Johnson. Steve Johnson would later become one of my guys, but Andrew Hines won, of course. Because if you remember Steve Johnson's first win, he probably had one of those infamous first wins in racing history. So anyway, there were 8 finalists in the events, and 6 of them were either my guys or did become one of my guys later on. So that was a pretty fun event. So I think that would be the answer to my question. My favorite NHRA event would be the 2004 Pontiac Excitement Nationals. Not just because it was a Destiny race, but because I had 5 and eventually 6 guys in the finals. Awesome. Do I believe that NBC will stay when their deal is up, or will ESPN and ABC come back with 10 races on ABC and 6 on ESPN2? I kind of hope that NBC is going to stay, because I don't want Fox taking the entire season, and there's no way that ESPN and ABC would welcome NASCAR back after how they were treated. I don't think that... Because realistically, I think the only NASCAR relatable person left that does anything NASCAR is Ricky Craven. That's it. And he's on SportsCenter every once in a blue moon, mainly on a Sunday. And the reason I don't think ESPN/ABC would want them back is because of how they were treated, not only amongst the Fox people, but because of how they and TNT believe they were treated compared to NBC when it was announced they were going to return. Because I don't know how many of you guys remember this, but when it was announced that they were going to return to NBC, both ESPN and ABC and both ESPN and TNT both wanted out of their current deal a year early. And because of that, I feel like that this is the reason why I feel like ESPN has basically disassociated anything involving NASCAR, with the possible exception of Craven. And the main thing about this is that this is something that I had feared. When you favor to a station that is inferior like Fox has become, and don't say it has, but don't say it's not inferior because it is, what ends up happening is that people start questioning everything in terms of this kind of setup. And then they start thinking that, oh, maybe Fox is the superior thing, even though it's obviously not, so let's bash everything else. And that's why people are bashing Rick Allen for no reason. Woohoo, he's not my joy! And why should this matter? I don't think that ESPN would want NASCAR to come back, because if NASCAR ever begs ESPN for anything, ESPN is going to shut the door on their face. That's how much they felt disrespected, and so did TNT. So, I hope NBC is going to stay. Because NASCAR needs something. And it's going to take more than Dale Jr. by himself to up the TV game. They got to find a way to get rid of Fox and bring in another network. But I guarantee you ESPN will not be that network. Because ESPN and TNT both felt this. Maybe TNT will give them another shot, I don't know. But likely no, and ESPN absolutely will not. So that would be a major problem. But I am hopeful that NBC will stay. Am I intrigued by the rebirth of the XFL? I actually am. Because listen, football needs something. The NFL is falling apart. Everything is getting out of control. We need a better variant of the game, and we need something to make things better. Now, I know there's this Alliance of American Football thing that's going to try and stuff a year earlier before the XFL, but I think what the AAF is not realizing that they're essentially going to make the same mistake the XFL did the first time. That's why they're aiming for 2020. Make sure they get everything right. Make sure nothing stupid goes on. I would love it, though. I actually subscribe to them. They actually have a YouTube channel. I already subscribed to them. That's how much I'm intrigued by this. And I'm hopeful that everything does go right. It would be intriguing to see what teams they're going to have now. Because I don't think they're going to have any of the teams they had the first time. So, it reminds me of something one of the other YouTubers who did a review on the potential for the XFL would be. And that would be... anyway. It'd be the potential to introduce new cities and all that stuff. And I know a lot of people were creating hashtags XFL plus whatever city they want to have a team. I personally did XFL Richmond. That would be excellent. The Richmond Dragons. That'd be great. I would love to see that. I really would. Oh, man. The Oakland Dragons. No, I'll stick with Richmond. And if Oakland gets a team, good for them. Because it did not deserve to lose their NFL team. Stupid Bush country. Would it be a good idea for IndyCar to go to Bristol or Martinsville? Did I answer that earlier? Hang on. There was a question earlier that said something about NASCAR going somewhere. IndyCar order. Yeah, it was them going to Miami. Go back to their original tracks. But how about 2 new track ideas for IndyCar? Would it be a good idea for IndyCar to go to Bristol or Martinsville? Bristol, with their banking, I'm not sure. It couldn't hurt to try. I remember one time they had a dirt race at Bristol with the World of Outlaws. And contrary to what I remember, it was actually in 2000. For some reason, my memory says 2003, but it was 2000. So, I think they could definitely try having a race at Bristol. But Martinsville, most certainly. It's a long enough track in that type of element, and it would definitely be one of the shorter racetracks that I think they've ever went to. I don't think they've ever gone to a track that's shorter than Richmond. And they were great at Richmond, so why not Martinsville?
How much longer? Or you could keep right on top.
I'm almost done. You can sit down. Just don't interfere. Anyway. Would it be a great idea? Bristol, I'm not sure because of the banking. Bristol, I'm not sure because of the banking, but Martinsville, most definitely. I would love to see them try to have an IndyCar race at Martinsville. That'd be a great idea. I love to see that. Hashtag IndyCar Martinsville. That's a great idea. IndyCar, put Martinsville on the schedule. That'd be great. What did I think of GSN's cover story on Michael Larson? Okay, so here's what happened. Back in January, GSN was going to start doing all these documentary things to reverberate their channel that they called cover stories. And the first one they did was actually a rehash of their first original documentary back in 2003. Back in the day, they did a special talking about the Michael Larson situation on my favorite game show of all time, Pressure Luck. It was called Big Bucks, the Pressure Luck Scandal. And the original variant was an hour-and-a-half show that had reviews of all the things that Michael had done. They had the 2 other original contestants and the original host there trying to figure all this stuff out. And they actually showed the actual episode in the middle of it, along with some bonus footage. I don't know how that worked. The cover story version took out the episode and essentially redid it with every single thing, with a few add-ons. They did have a couple things that were different. They featured Michael Larson's daughter, who got some things for her birthday. So what Michael said he was going to do in terms of her birthday, he did do for them a little bit. But the GSN cover story was essentially a rehash of their documentary. At least they started doing actual non-rehash documentaries. They were doing a lottery one. They were doing the new Princess. That was a Deal or No Deal model. And a couple other things too. But I think the Larson one was the most interesting one. And I like what they did at the end. I don't know if anyone else has watched this, but at the end of the event, they actually had a little bit of an homage to Peter Tomarken, who is my top favorite in the game show world. He's the game show guy you see in my intros, along with Johnny and the Undertaker and Ho-Oh and Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. But they had a pretty nice little tribute, except they got the day of his death wrong. They actually had it as March 16th, it was March 13th. But other than that, it wasn't too bad of a documentary. I just wish they made it a little more unique compared to their original documentary. And I have the original documentary on my laptop because I found it on YouTube. Wow. What a crazy story. Still a huge tale in the games world after all this time. So thank you everyone for watching Dragonite's Mailbag. I hope you enjoyed. If you have a question for me, hopefully I'll be able to feature it in episode 8. And hopefully it won't take half a year, depending on the amount of questions. Thank you everyone for watching. This is Ultimate 23 Dragon, and that's my final answer.